Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's SANS webcast, Transition to Cybersecurity from a Non-Cyber Role, Creative Ways to Impress the Land, Your Dream Cyber Role. My name is Jessica Gallus of SANS, and I'll be moderating today's webcast. Today's featured speaker is Kevin Garvey, SANS instructor. If during the webcast you have any questions for our presenter, please enter them into the questions window located on the GoToWebinar interface at any time. Please note that this webcast is being recorded, and a copy of the slides and recording of this webcast will be made available for viewing and can be found on the SANS registration page. And with that, I'd like to hand the webcast over to Kevin.
Thank you so much, Jessica, and thank you everybody for taking a little bit of time to go over how you can make that transition from a non-cyber role over to cybersecurity. And this is the last series of the HR Cybercast Talent Series, where we're going to talk about some creative ways for you to get into the cybersecurity field. We've covered a lot of topics over the last few webinars that we've done. And we have done a really great job of giving you the tools to hopefully make you feel successful and to know that not only do we want you to be part of the cybersecurity group, we want you with open arms. We want you to be part of the cybersecurity workforce. And hopefully through all of the webcasts and all of the tools that we've given to you over the last few webinars, that you're going to be able to utilize them to help you in your journey into cybersecurity. And as we start talking about this particular webinar, we're really going to be focusing in on some of the existing talents that you already bring to the table within your current job role. And in many circumstances, it may not be a cybersecurity role, but don't fret. There are some really good parallels we're going to be able to make with the experience that you already have, what you bring to the table, and how you can start transitioning some of that really good experience into a cybersecurity role. So we're going to go over how we can look at some of those job searches a little bit differently. We're going to have that frightened job search, the one where you log into your favorite job searching platform and you say to yourself, oh my God, I don't have the qualifications. Well, I'm going to give you some tools that you could utilize to figure out, hey, with the experience that you have and that great experience that you have, what could you utilize and what jobs really do fit that experience that would allow you to be successful in a future cybersecurity role? We're going to go through a few job descriptions as well, where again, we're going to parallel two different types of skills. We're going to look at those technical skills, and then we're going to look at those non-technical skills, or ones that aren't system admin oriented, ones that haven't required you to have, for example, privileged access into a system. Well, you're going to understand a little bit more about what I'm talking about when we go into that description. We're also going to go into some other job descriptions that you might not even realize have to do with cybersecurity. And I love going into this section partly because when I talk about cybersecurity to those who aren't familiar with the field, you know, many of times they don't realize that cybersecurity, yeah, it has a technical component, but it also has a non-quote-unquote technical component as well. And we're going to conclude with some very basic skills for you to continue to build on throughout your journey. And some of those that are referenced through SANS, and then others that are part of that soft skill development that, you know, really going to make you successful within your cybersecurity role, within your journey into cybersecurity. Well, before we delve into that, I'd like to tell you a little bit about myself. So my name is Kevin Garvey, and I'm an IT security manager. I'm also an associate instructor with SANS, and I teach the Management 512 course, which is the Security Essentials for Managers course. And I have loved teaching this course over the years. Why have I loved it? Well, I have enjoyed the students that have been in the class, who come in from many different, not only walks of life, but different levels of experience as well. Many are starting the cybersecurity journey just like you are, but they could be joining at different ventures of their career. They could be just starting out without any experience, and they also could be joining cybersecurity with a wealth of experience, but they're just getting introduced into the cybersecurity field. And I love the conversations back and forth that I have with those students. So they really get to understand not only what their questions are, but also the great knowledge and the great experience that they bring to the table and ultimately make that cybersecurity journey a successful one for themselves. I also have experience as a IT security manager in a few different sectors, in the finance sector, media, and also the utility sector as well. I've done a lot of interviews, probably many more than I can count, through many different job roles. Talking about junior roles all the way up to experienced level roles. And I've had that opportunity to learn myself what many individuals are looking for from that cybersecurity job. And I've talked a little bit about that throughout this web series. And I've also done a few, what I like to call transitional hires. And what do I mean by transitional hires? Well, we brought in folks from other organizations, not only other functional areas of other organizations, but also internally as well. And a great example of this is when I started bringing in some folks from our Windows team and also our Linux team to help join us within our cybersecurity group. We're going to go into some examples of how that technical experience that they had really made them great candidates and also wildly successful within cybersecurity. Now, on the other side, we also had some folks who were just coming in. I had one individual coming in from a marketing background, and they ended up having a really successful journey within cybersecurity as well. You might be wondering, Kevin, how does that make sense? How is somebody from a marketing background going to have a really successful journey in cybersecurity? Well, there are some great examples that we're going to be able to go into as I go through some of those other job descriptions that you may not even realize align to the cybersecurity industry. I started off as a finance major. Now, I started off as a finance major and I landed one particular job in finance, but I wanted to bring that up for the sole purpose that when I walked into the job, I noticed that I was the only one who had a finance degree. Everyone else had a different degree. Some were coming in from a humanities type of degree. I had a few others that were part of my team that were coming in from, hey, even a comp sci degree into finance. But I was scratching my head, why was I the only one in this quote unquote finance job with a finance degree? Well, as I started learning, and something that I paralleled over to cybersecurity as well, just because one has a particular degree or has done a method of study, whether at university or self-study level, means that they could be successful in many other jobs as well. And that was very true within finance, and it's also very true within cybersecurity. I had some of the exact same issues trying to get into cybersecurity throughout my journey as well. And what I ended up doing is start bolstering and really looking at what I could do to bring my talents not only to the resume and then also the job descriptions, but then also to the interviews as well, really required a little bit of creativity along the way. I was very curious, and I remember back to my help desk days when I was working at the local university that I attended. I was really curious when an individual or a student had brought in a laptop and it was just littered with viruses. And I say this for those who remember way back when, back in 2005, computers really were quote unquote littered with viruses. You would open up the laptop and you would see tons of pop-ups along the way. And you knew, hey, there is some type of virus or potentially some type of malware on this host or on this particular user computer. And what I really liked about that was, well, some other folks, and they were doing the right thing. It was what we were told to do. We needed to swap out the hard drive, put in a new one, and send that user on their way in order to, well, be successful for their own career. Well, I wanted to keep the laptop a little bit longer. I wanted to see, hey, how did this user potentially get that virus onto this computer? What was the behavior of the virus? What were they trying to do? And I started really figuring out that I enjoyed going into a lot of the technical depths, even though I didn't have that quote unquote job of a cybersecurity professional at the time. I really did very much enjoy being able to play with the Windows event logs, for example, or just to see and really play back what the user had done, talk to the user about what their behavior was at the time. And I really got to understand a little bit about what that thought process is within cybersecurity. A few other things I also did as well is I started looking at networking. And when I say networking, I started talking to other system admins. I didn't have access to the firewalls, for example. So I talked with the network admin at the local university that I was at to really get a good understanding of, hey, what this individual's job was. And throughout that, I was able to gain a little bit more experience as I started building up that cybersecurity journey for myself. And to be very honest, way back in 2005, 2006, I'm gonna let you in on a secret. I didn't even know cybersecurity was a career But what I was really fun is that I was really building up to understanding what cybersecurity was. And when that opportunity finally did come to me, I had a lot of really good, through networking and curiosity, a little bit of knowledge to really pepper into some of the interviews and even on the resume as well. I also did a lot of training. I really wanted to utilize the fact that I could learn a lot, whether it be online or just going over to a bookstore, and really learn a lot about some of the technologies that I ultimately would be supporting through that system admin role, desk side support role. And then ultimately, as my career grew, I started looking at some of those cybersecurity tool sets and really getting some of that training along the way as well. But I tell you about my journey because it really was not a linear journey. There was a lot that went into being part of that cybersecurity community. And again, I didn't start off as a cybersecurity degreed professional. In fact, I didn't even start off in an IT or a computer science degree. I started off with a finance degree, but I learned a lot from that because again, I really started to look at what potentially the finance industry was doing, and they were bringing in people who, well, did not take up finance either. Yet they were also very successful in finance. That parallels quite well to what we are currently facing within cybersecurity as well. And it allows us as the cybersecurity professionals and everybody who's applying to cybersecurity roles to know that, hey, we want to hear from you. We want to know what talents you can bring to the cybersecurity community. And in fact, you already have a lot of those talents. Unfortunately, when folks start looking at their favorite job boards and you type in a very basic search of an IT or information security specialist, well, you end up getting a little discouraged, and rightfully so, right? You know, I did a search as I was preparing for this webinar of a information security specialist. And what I did is I copy and pasted just a few things that I saw on one of the searches. And it really blew my mind because as I started looking at information security specialist, I started thinking about, hey, if I were back in college, if I were looking at a cybersecurity specialist role without that cybersecurity experience, I very quickly look at the security specialist position. I'm going to freak out a little bit. Hey, 5 years of technical experience. And of course, on this description, it states that it's related to cyber defense or cybersecurity type of solutions. So right off the bat, and especially thinking about when I had first graduated or was first getting into the IT industry, well, I really would have been discouraged. I don't think I would have applied for the role because I didn't fit that criteria of having the 5 or more years of technical experience. Also, industry certificates. A lot of those industry certificates can be a little hard to get sometimes, whether it be for the monetary purpose, or it also could be because they require particular years of experience. Now, some certifications do not require that as well, but as you start looking at some of the roles, you might get a little discouraged. And I don't want you getting discouraged. I want you to join the industry. I want you to be part of this really cool community that we have and not feel discouraged as we start looking at some of those jobs that are showing up as an information security specialist, cybersecurity specialist, cybersecurity analyst. They are great roles, don't get me wrong, and they require a really great understanding of cybersecurity. But there are very interesting ways to really think about this job search a little bit better, especially as we start making that jump from what, well, a lot of us have, which is that experience in a job field prior. What can we bring to the table that would ultimately fit the requirements of this role while also making sure that we are successful within our cybersecurity role as well? And I started thinking about it a lot more. And I started thinking about some of the advice and mentorship that I would give to some of the folks that were either applying for particular job roles within cybersecurity or potentially had transitioned over to roles within my groups over the last few years. And I want to impart a few recommendations that I would give to really open up your eyes a little bit to see, hey, although, when we start looking at that information security specialist role or that broader role, you might get a little discouraged with the requirements and that experience. There are other ways that we could search for job openings within the cybersecurity industry. Before I go into some of those job descriptions, one thing that I wanted to bring to your attention was that SANS Cyber Talent Assessment. And that Cyber Talent Assessment is a little bit more of an aptitude type of an assessment that would look at, well, looking at the candidate and what they offer and bring to the table in terms of knowledge. But why am I talking about a test right now? Well, I'm talking about a test because we start looking at the different functional areas of cybersecurity in a little bit more detail. as we start looking at that SANS cyber talent assessment. And there's a few other assessment type programs out there that we've talked about over the last few webinars as well. But I bring it to your attention because it starts going into some detail of some of these cyber functional areas that you might be able to search for. And you might be able to find that a lot of your experience, especially if you come in from a little bit of a technical background, might really be applicable to some of these areas under cybersecurity. So there are a lot of folks who are learning about cloud right now, whether it be Amazon Web Services or Azure or Google Cloud, or maybe even private cloud platforms. Well, that type of cloud engineering, that type of cloud analyst type role fits very well into security as well, because you start getting some of that knowledge, some of that working IT knowledge. It's going to be really successful for you as you start looking to defend the knowledge that you already have. Some of the other cyber assessments and also areas within cybersecurity, and again, this is just the cyber talent assessment. There's a lot of other ways that we could really divide the pie up into what some of the functional areas are within cybersecurity. Include cyber defense, penetration testing, application security, digital forensics, industrial control systems, and also management as well, which we're going to keep in mind as we go toward some of the later slides in today's deck. But why, again, do I bring this up? Well, as we start thinking about looking at cybersecurity specialists, it's a very broad search, right? And for those who maybe don't know what the industry has in terms of some of the functional areas, you might think that potentially that is the only way to get introduced into cybersecurity. Well, we're going to go through two different types of job descriptions that might open your eyes a little bit to see, hey, you actually do have a door into cybersecurity where potentially you may not need that 5 years of experience, and it aligns to some of these cybersecurity functional areas that we talk about, not only here within the cyber talent assessment, but then also as you start going into the working world, especially within the cybersecurity world, where you have many different functional areas under a cybersecurity umbrella. So one of those detailed job descriptions, again, we're sort of taking out that cyber or information security specialist or analyst role, and now we're going to dig a little bit deeper into the functional areas. Okay, so here's a great example of a little bit more of a detailed job description. And this in particular is a Security Operations Center analyst or a SOC analyst. And this is something that I searched for on one of my favorite job search websites. And I noticed that there were a lot of commonalities between not only this, but then also a lot of the other descriptions against this job role as well. Now, one thing I'd like you to take away from this is right off the bat, you see that the qualifications are very different than what I just talked about with that information security specialist role. And you might be wondering to yourself, hey, is there really a big difference with the role? That's not something you have to worry about right now. What I'd like you to take away is to think about how this particular job and what you're searching for might be able to open up that door that, well, you think cannot open just looking at a cybersecurity analyst or information security role. Let's walk through this a little bit because this is some great ways of getting into cybersecurity that allow you to really learn a lot about the field very quickly and opens up that door for you. So when you start looking at the basic qualifications, well, it's a little bit different, right? We don't have that 5 years of experience that was requirement from the other job description. We do have an interesting one, which I loved, and I really wanted to showcase it within this particular job description. Highly motivated to work in information security. I'll tell you, every individual who I've met who is trying to get into information security, cybersecurity, has really done a lot of due diligence to not only understand the field, but to learn about the field. And they're very interested in it, right? You know, they're able to not only talk about some of the fundamental technologies or fundamental thought processes within cybersecurity, but they're also able to start talking about some of the newsworthy events as well. And I could figure this out as we start going through the interview processes. Well, how do we figure that out? Well, you're a highly motivated person who wants to work in information security. Well, that's a really softer entrance than what we had just talked about with that 5 years of information security. Again, just flipping that job description around a little bit, potentially, hey, maybe it opens up that door that you might have thought was closed just by putting in a particular job description. Customer oriented and professional. Yeah, absolutely. This is something as well that, hey, there is not a number requirement on it, but we're trying to figure out how those soft skills really fit into that cybersecurity role. Okay, so we have two soft skills that are showcased over here. And then we have three, what I like to call harder skills, or a little bit more of those technical skills that we'll see. Ability to understand or correlate logs or data from multiple sources. And there's a few examples on the screen of that right now. Understanding on how both Windows and Linux and potentially network platforms work as well. Okay, well, this is now starting to get into some of those quote unquote harder skills or hard skills. And especially for those who have experience in other roles, when we start looking at cybersecurity, we start looking at that original job description, you might be thinking to yourself, hey, even with all that great IT or technology experience that I have, I don't have that information security experience. Meanwhile, there's another description, a SOC analyst type role that you already potentially fit some of the requirements for right off the bat. Now, I want you to keep this job description in your mind, because what we're going to do is parallel it to, let's just say, a hypothetical individual who has a little bit of IT or potentially some system admin experience along the way. So this is the exact same job description, but now we're going to parallel it back to more generic information technology type of experience that one might bring to the table along the way. So a highly motivated individual who wants to work in cybersecurity. Well, we might be able to, whether it be on a resume or during an interview, start talking about some of the trainings that you've taken, or potentially some of the open source technologies, especially cybersecurity open source technologies that you play around with. And we talked a little bit about that in a prior webinar, which I'm going to refer to within the blog that I write for this particular webcast, where we'll reference again some of those open source technologies, especially if you don't have that, whether it be the privileges or the resources to be able to play with those technologies at your current role. But I'll tell you, when I talk to somebody, especially somebody trying to get into the industry and they don't have particular experience in one technology or another, one of the strongest answers I've heard is that they play with some of the open source technology and build up a lab environment for themselves. And again, I talked a little bit about that in some of those other webinars that I did as well. Customer oriented and professional. I'll never forget one of my second role within cybersecurity. I was really prepped for the interview. I had all my technical knowledge that I thought I needed. I had all the other information I thought the individual who was hiring for the role was going to ask. And you know what they ended up focusing in on? Well, it's actually my supermarket experience from high school and a little bit of college. And it took me by surprise, but it really shouldn't have, because I started thinking about how within cybersecurity, just like with a lot of other functional areas within the organization, well, we have to be customer oriented, right? We have to be professional. And it also just so happened that that individual also worked at a supermarket as well. We really bonded over that. And we started talking about that customer experience. So you never know what experience that you bring to the table someone's going to be able to pick up on. And I'll tell you, it ended up being a really good job within cybersecurity, all based on some supermarket experience and that conversation I had that I put on the resume. And it really showcased a lot of that customer-oriented and professionalism that was required for the role. Now, thinking about some of those harder skills along the way. Well, for those who have worked in a desk side support type role, or system admin type role, or hey, even other non-system admin or desktop type roles, could be talking about a programmer, could be talking about a database admin. You are technical, and I'm telling you, we want you to be in cybersecurity because we want to learn from you how we could defend those technologies that you are incredibly proficient in. And that's going to be really important as we start building up not only some of these roles that have a little bit less of that quote unquote entry compared to what I was talking about, but actually have a lot of the experience that, again, you already have. We're going to be able to utilize it, but in a different way. So a great example of this is in my prior role, we were able to bring on an individual who had worked in a system admin type role for approximately about 10 years within the organization. And this individual really wanted to get into security. And a security architecture role opened up. We interviewed the individual. We brought this individual into the group. And I'm telling you, it was one of the best hires that we had within our group, because not only did they understand what the technologies were that we were defending, but you know what was also really cool is that they had some really good knowledge of the systems and how things were set up, because they had been there for approximately 10 years or so. And it was really good to bring this person in because, again, when we start looking at if that individual were to look at a cybersecurity specialist role, very much like what we had just talked about, well, they wouldn't have fit the requirement, right? they actually did fit the requirement, and they fit the requirement quite well with some of that underlying technical experience that they had along the way. So especially if you do have technical experience, again, it could be anything. It could be dev side, it could be system admin type work, it could be being a database administrator, a programmer. Maybe you're aligned to a DevOps type function right now. There are really good parallels to really fit back into that cybersecurity umbrella and to bring that technical knowledge into play. You just have to play with those job descriptions a little bit and find where your experience really fits in and fits in very, very well into some of these open roles. Well, let's take a little bit of a different spin. Let's look at another detailed job description. So we talked a little bit about information security specialist, where that individual required 5 years of experience. Well, now we're going to look at a different description. And in particular, we're going to look at really delving into that grouping that we had talked about that SANS had developed of some of the other functional areas within cybersecurity. In this particular one, we're going to delve a little bit into vulnerability. And this one is a remediation support specialist. So again, I did a search on one of the job board sites, my favorite job board site, and I started looking at some of the requirements for a vulnerability analyst, which is an important part of a organization, of a security organization. It's part of a vulnerability management program. Just like the security operations center analyst was part of a security operations center, or security operations type functionality. Well, now we start looking at vulnerability management. It's one of the best ways, in my opinion, to start really making that headway into cybersecurity. And there's a few different reasons for it, which we're going to get into. Well, some of those basic qualifications. And as we start looking at the qualifications, notice how some of those hard skills that were required with that SOC analyst are not showing up for the vulnerability remediation support analyst role. Now, what's very interesting about this, and to be very fair, I'll say that there were probably about 50% of roles that did have some technical requirements that are associated with a vulnerability role, and then the other 50% did not. They had a little bit more along the lines of what we're talking about over here. And what are we talking about over here? We're talking about bringing a vulnerability or something that is essentially identified or assessed through that vulnerability management lifecycle. And what is it? Well, it's almost like the project lifecycle, where we're looking to start up a project and, well, close that project. We're doing the same thing with vulnerabilities in this particular scenario. We're going to be looking at vulnerabilities by identifying them, and we're going to start looking at how we analyze them all the way to being able to treat vulnerabilities. And a lot of that requires some very keen knowledge of maybe not as much the technology, although it does certainly help, but the business, and making sure people can come to the table to really help you out to make sure that your role is successful. And a lot of folks that work with vulnerability management, not only type of solutions, but programs, yeah, they do have to understand what the data points are that potentially come from a vulnerability management tool or a risk assessment type tool. But importantly, they have to drive the vulnerability remediation to completion. And a lot of times that requires very pointed conversations with, well, could be remediation teams or senior management. And then also we have to think about how do we showcase all of not only the good work, but what the identified risks are within an organization. Well, how do you do that? Well, you do not start it out by giving somebody an Excel sheet of 30,000 vulnerabilities, for example. You maybe give them a dashboard. And we start thinking about turning in all those data points that we have from our tool into something that's consumable by upper management. Well, everything about what I'm talking about right now really falls in line, not as much on the technical side. Now we're looking at really utilizing the data, telling a story with the data, and really marrying it up with whether it be key performance indicators or key risk indicators, aligning it to our risk organization. So just like we did before with the other role, let's parallel it to some of that non-technical experience. Now, again, we're utilizing that vulnerability remediation support analyst, looking at managing that end-to-end vulnerability lifecycle from that discovery to closure. Well, there's a lot of parallels here, and a lot of the parallels don't fall into the technology. It could fall under potentially a business analyst, or whether you were a project manager, or you had done product-oriented work as well. Same with performing vulnerability assessments to identify, well, weaknesses and countermeasures. That could be with a lot of work that you've done with a risk organizational risk council, for example. Or we could also be looking at the data points and really trying to figure out, hey, how do we tell that story? How do we pull it into a metric of some sort? And we're going to be able to do that with vulnerabilities because there are a lot of data points with vulnerabilities. And we're going to have a lot of spreadsheets or potentially different risk dashboards that we're going to have to ingest. And we're also going to have to potentially create as well. Well, why do I say all this? Because some of that non-technical experience, non-sysadmin experience really comes into play here. Thinking about what you potentially have done as a project manager or a business analyst or somewhere where you were supporting a business function, and it does not even have to be part of information technology, really is very similar here in this particular job description. It's part of this vulnerability management function. So what I'd like again for you to take away from this is, as we start looking at some of those job descriptions, you do have some really key entry points into cyber, but we really have to start digging down into some of those really more critical functional areas of cybersecurity, starting to look at some of those junior or analyst and associate job roles for some of those functional areas, and being able to really pick out how the experience that you bring to the table really parallels well to what the requirements are for the role along the way. And as we start looking at some of the other items that we have within cybersecurity, hey, cybersecurity in most circumstances, and my mother, I know, thinks this as well, is that we sit in front of a computer all day long and we are staring at potentially a terminal session. And I love my mother to tears. That's what she thinks we do all the time. We wear a lot of different hats. Well, we are technically risk assessors, right? We're looking at what we can do to mitigate the risk of cybersecurity throughout an organization. And there's some other job roles that really fall very well into this category as well. So here are 3 examples, but it's certainly not limited to 3 that I wanted to make sure everyone was fairly well aware about. So there could be a risk analyst role, looking at understanding the risk of whether it be technology or that cybersecurity risk in an organization, and looking at identifying it, looking at what you can do to treat it, and then also looking at what you can do to report against that risk as well. There's also a lot of conversations that a cybersecurity team has with audit. And this could be an internal audit or potentially an external audit. And a lot of these conversations have to do with what is implemented within a cybersecurity program, looking at what the controls are within a program, being a little bit of a control assessor, if you would. Well, that's going to require you to really understand a lot about the technology, and then also how a program, a cybersecurity program, is developed along the way as well. And a great example of this, and again, I pulled a description from one of my favorite job board sites when I started looking at IT security audit analysts. Well, lead and execute complex IT security assurance projects. But what does that imply? That you're going to be able to learn a lot about how these particular systems, how these projects are not only developed, how they're implemented, but what are they doing to potentially reduce the risk in an organization, all through auditing. And I'll never forget, this is back in another organization. I really got to know internal audit very, very well. And it was a great group of folks. Now, one day they wanted to learn a little bit more about our vulnerability management program. So what we ended up doing is we gave them the login to the vulnerability program. And I was amazed, 5 days later, they came back with an enormous amount of data points as to what was working well, and then also, not surprisingly, what was not working so well within our vulnerability management program. But one thing I took from it was, well, that was a really good opportunity to learn a lot about the technology of vulnerability scanning. And the auditors not only learned about it, but they were also able to run with it successfully as well. And I'll tell you, they did a really good job of being able to go through the program to understand a lot of what the technical audit requirements were. So you might think of audit as not technical. In many circumstances, it is a little bit technical. In fact, SANS does have an audit course aligned to some of the audits in what you can do, especially technical audits against the CIS benchmarks that allow you to start thinking about what we can do to assess against a particular program. I'll give you a hint, that's still part of the cybersecurity umbrella. And we also have the business analyst role. And the business analyst role, somewhat parallels a little bit to what we were talking about with vulnerability management, because we start looking at what we can do to really analyze what the business requirements are, turn them into something that allows the business, will allow cybersecurity to showcase not only all of the good work that we do, but really turn things into a process, turn things into something that's going to be able to go into metrics, for example, as time moves on. And in fact, there have been a lot of folks who have taken that Management 512 course who have come in as business analysts. And maybe they weren't aligned to cybersecurity at the time, but then they started getting more and more aligned to cybersecurity oriented projects and wanted to really make that knowledge gap transfer of what they learned from a cyber analyst, or sorry, a business analyst, over to many of the cybersecurity requirements. I'll tell you, after keeping in touch with them, they really did understand a lot about cybersecurity. And in fact, there was one individual that ended up getting a cybersecurity specialist role after being a business analyst within cybersecurity. So again, 3 different jobs, and this is not a limiting group of jobs. There are many other jobs out there that, again, especially when you're not aligned to the industry and you're looking into the industry, you might not realize these jobs are here. They can really get you up to speed very quickly. Another great one that I didn't have enough room to put in is project management. So project management, especially if you're aligned to cybersecurity type projects, really force your hand to figure out not only how this project fits into the larger book of work and the requirements from the organization, but then also starting to look at what we can do to start building up that knowledge of the project manager in cybersecurity oriented topics. Again, a lot of different ways, a lot of different vectors to be a cybersecurity expert. And there's a lot out there. Somebody's just got to be a little bit creative of what we're looking for, and also retrospectively think about, how do you see yourself as a cybersecurity professional? What is going to make you not only successful, but also happy as a cybersecurity professional as well? And I wanted to end this particular section with describing that business information security officer, or a BISO type role. And I bring this up for a lot of folks who I've talked to who have a lot of great experience that maybe doesn't translate well into cybersecurity, for example. They could have some great leadership experience. They could have been a leader or an organizational leader at an organization, and they really do have a lot of interest within cybersecurity. And as we started looking at what that business information security officer offers, well, they offer that communication between not only different business units, but then also with the cybersecurity group as well. So they're going to have to understand that technical speak, because they're going to have to speak some technicalities with other business groups, but then they're also going to have to understand the business as well. And that business information security officer, many of times, is a very senior role. So I bring this up because, well, we talked a little bit about some of the analyst, junior, associate type of roles, ones that are going to get your foot in the door as a cybersecurity professional. But there's also other ways you could do that too. And a great example of this is through that business information security officer role that allows you to really hone in on your information security skills, become that practitioner that you want to be with information security, while also utilizing some of that great leadership experience that you bring to the table to be able to talk to other business units, to be able to talk to other cybersecurity groups, and to be able to do it with a lot of confidence as well. So there is an entry point for any level of experience that one might have, especially if you really have that urge and want to get into that cybersecurity field along the way. Now, we talked a little bit about many of those job roles, and to think about what we can do to maybe hone in on a search, so that opens up that door for you just a little bit more. There's a lot of other examples that are going to allow you to open up that door to a role that maybe potentially doesn't have that 5 years of experience. In that time, a few other things that I wanted you to keep in mind as we start thinking about building up the skills for your future cybersecurity career. One I've seen a lot of is just understanding data, understanding what we can do to not only pull data correctly, parse data correctly, but then also be able to tell a story with data. And I put down here spreadsheets because one of the greatest skills of a cybersecurity professional is understanding spreadsheets. It's understanding, for example, Microsoft Excel and understanding it very, very well. In fact, I took a forensics course through SANS, the Forensics 500 course, which is a great course about learning about cybersecurity forensics. And one of the first things that the instructor talked about was their favorite tool. What was their favorite tool in forensics? It was Microsoft Excel. It was a spreadsheet tool. And why is that? Well, it was because there's so much data that this individual, this instructor needed to go through that they needed to understand how to be able to filter and to pivot on that data correctly. And that holds true for so many different areas of cybersecurity. We have a ton of data to be able to go through. And we're going to have to understand, how do we read through that data? Understanding spreadsheets is such an important thing and a knowledge point to have within cybersecurity. And it's a great thing for you to continue to practice and hone in your skill on, or utilizing many of the great Excel skills or spreadsheet skills that you have. You might be able to bring some really great data analytics to the cybersecurity table. Another one, which was a little bit of a surprise to me when I started getting into the field, but it really plays into it, is public speaking. And public speaking, not just going out and doing, for example, webinars or going out and speaking to those outside of your organization, but what you want to do is you want to be confident, you want to be comfortable being able to talk to folks outside of your group to showcase what the cybersecurity group is doing. And in particular, there is a great job role such as a security awareness coordinator, security awareness training, that really enforces the need of users to understand they're part of that cybersecurity team, just like the team that you want to join. Now, why is that so important? We have to talk to those users. We have to talk to them, whether it be in person or over a webinar or over some other medium, to be able to really understand what they can bring to the table and also how we can help them be security awareness practitioners. But you have to be comfortable being able to speak to them, right? And we have to do that through public speaking. So that's one of those other skills that really surprisingly becomes very important within cybersecurity. Another great example is, for example, if you're looking at becoming a penetration tester or being able to start finding vulnerabilities or flaws in particular products. Well, security flaws at that. Well, we're going to have to present our findings. And when we present our findings, and this happens all the time, especially for red teamers or penetration testers, we have to be able to talk with a lot of confidence with what we found. And we're going to have to talk to senior management. We might even have to talk to other senior management that's outside. Maybe it could be a different business owner or a different business unit, especially if what we were pen testing or penetration testing ended up finding a really severe flaw or vulnerability along the way. And we have to be very comfortable being able to talk. Well, that is yet another requirement of cybersecurity. Being able to do problem solving. Hey, we are constantly looking to see what that threat actor is doing in order to knock at the door and try to be successful to evade all of the different defense mechanisms that we put into place. So we are trying to solve that particular problem. And that's just one example out of many. Every single day is a problem-solving type of puzzle in a good way within cybersecurity. And also written communication. And I talked a little bit about pen testing. Now, for penetration testing, what many pen testers have to do, they have to write a report afterwards. And when they write that report, guess what? It's them that's writing that report. They have to write that out. And there's many other ways that we have to really showcase that strong writing ability within cybersecurity. And if you want to learn a little bit more about that written communication, there's a great course at SANS Sec 402. That's about cybersecurity writing, really thinking about ways to hone in on those writing skills that really are very important with cybersecurity to allow you to communicate effectively, especially outside of your particular group. And we talked a little bit about some of those skills that aren't aligned to cybersecurity. Some of those other skills that are aligned to cybersecurity, well, you can start building up those skills for free at sans.org/free. There's a few great ways that you could do that. If you look at cyberaces.org, we start looking at some of the free core concepts of cybersecurity. SANS summits, looking at SANS webinars, Tech Tuesday, and also there is a cache of white papers that are written by not just SANS instructors, but then also some of the students that have taken SANS courses as well, in order for you to be able to get some of that technical acumen, technical understanding about what is the pressing thing that cybersecurity analysts are looking for within 2021, in 2020, and even in hopefully going into 2022 as well. So feel free to utilize all of the free items that SANS has at your disposal as well. There's also a great new to cyber curriculum that includes Sec 275, which is really starting to understand about computers and technology. It starts building up some of that cybersecurity knowledge. Then cybersecurity, or Sec 301, starts building on that fundamentals and looking at what we could do to get that introduction into cybersecurity. And security, or Sec 401, really starts building into getting some of that technical acumen for cybersecurity, and allows you to start thinking about what you can do to build up that technical knowledge of not just computers, and not just computers in general that you can learn about in Sec 275, but then also looking about your cybersecurity skill set, your technical skill set, building up starting at 301 and then going into 401 to really get you prepped for some of the really cool courses that are in the 500s and the 600s and even in the 700 level courses, as we start looking at many of those functional areas of cybersecurity that we talked about through the cybersecurity functional map that I talked about a little bit earlier. Now, just putting everything into a conclusion, one thing I'd love for you to watch out for are those intimidating job descriptions. And they're not there to intimidate you by design. It might just be that, well, potentially it's not the right fit. But that doesn't mean that every single job, especially a job to really utilize some of the skills that you have to bring into the cybersecurity field, would never make you a cybersecurity superstar. In fact, you have a lot of great opportunities to be able to search for different job titles in different functional areas as you start looking how you can make that intro into the cybersecurity field with that experience that you already have from a lot of great work that you've done. That experience matters. So thinking about that parallel that I made on those two job descriptions, I invite you to think about something like that as well. As you start looking at some of those job descriptions and you start looking at what you can do to parallel your experience, what you bring to the table, and how you fit that into some of those cybersecurity roles. And then many of those roles come in many different shapes and sizes as we start looking at whether it be some of those like SOC analyst roles that we talked about, and we've looked at vulnerability management. We also have risk roles. We have audit roles. There's governance roles. There's many other roles that support a cybersecurity function and really fit into the cybersecurity industry. You are that cybersecurity professional, and you're doing it through another mechanism that you absolutely are as just of a cybersecurity professional going into those fields in those particular jobs as well. Again, in conclusion, I want you to join this amazing cybersecurity field. It's a lot of fun. It's incredibly dynamic. There's a lot of great work that's done from the cybersecurity community from all over. And we learn a lot each and every day. And I love going into work every single day, bringing in a lot of what I learned the next day, or I'm sorry, the day before and the week before, month, year before, and finding out that I've got to do a little bit of whether it's relearning or even new learning. And I think that ends up being one of the most dynamic things about cybersecurity. And I want to make sure that if you want to be in the cybersecurity field, you have that option to be in there. And all of that great work that you put into your career, your prior roles, your prior experience really showcases itself in the most applicable way and allows you to really start looking at some of those roles that might really interest you in cybersecurity. So with that, thank you very, very much for the time. I really appreciate you taking a little bit of time today on this summer day to talk about how you could join that cybersecurity field and joining in that last installment of the HR Cybersecurity Professional Series. So with that, let me hand it over to Jessica.
All right. Well, thank you, Kevin, for your great insight. We do have a lot of feedback and questions, so let me grab one here. We'll get started. So first question we have is, what advice do you have for someone who is migrating from a CFE fraud certificate along with experience and internal audit who wants to move into cybersecurity? How would someone make that transition?
That's a really good question, Jessica. And I hope that the comment that I had made about internal audit, and especially ones that are aligned to whether it be IT audit or even a cybersecurity oriented type functionality, will find that that actually really helps with that transition. And I know that there was one individual that I used to work with who was in an internal audit role that moved over to an IT audit role. And as they started moving over to an IT audit role, they found that they really enjoyed getting their fingers into some of the technology. And after learning more and more about the technology, it took them a few years to not only get some of that hands-on experience, but to be able to understand why some of the tool sets were even there. They were able to make a little bit of a jump into a more technical, non-audit role. And that's what that individual wanted to do. I've also seen the flip side of that too. I've seen where a lot of folks have been in a very technical role, and then they want to go into a little bit more of like, for example, that governance role that we talked about. Could be an audit role. And I've seen a lot of that type of migration as well, going from the technical to a little bit less of a day-to-day technical, and then vice versa as well. So it's certainly a two-way street when it comes to that type of migration.
All right, great, thank you. Let's see, next question is, I was wondering if you could share what the basic qualifications for a junior pen tester role would look like, aside from the few that you mentioned already, when it comes to effective communication and reporting.
Very good question as well. So when I start looking at penetration testing and I start looking at what some of the basic qualifications are, I start looking at a little bit about what they've done experience-wise, whether it be in an IT role prior or if they've learned about penetration testing without any experience. I'll take it from two parts. One, if they do have some of that technical experience already, I think I'd like to understand what they've done in terms of some of the tool sets that they've learned really apply to that non-cybersecurity type of technical acumen and library that they have. However, what I have seen, especially with a lot of folks who have transitioned over to a penetration testing type role, is that they end up really showcasing a certification. So there's some great GX certifications that are aligned to penetration testing, and there are also some other organizations that showcase what you could do to do like a 24-hour lab, for example, the OSCP certification. That's also a really good indication, not only with the GX certs, but then also with the OSCP cert to showcase that you've got a little bit of not only that technical acumen, but then also really looking at you've made that commitment as well, that you were committed to really learn about penetration testing. Now, one thing I will take away, and this I've seen a lot for folks who are really looking in and haven't been part of that cybersecurity industry, is that, again, I want you to see that there is a lot outside of penetration testing as well when it comes to cybersecurity. You know, there's digital forensics, incident response, there's that vulnerability management, security operations center. So don't think, and I've heard this from some folks that I've talked to, that penetration testing is the only way. It is a way to get into cyber. Don't get me wrong, it's a great way to get into cyber. But I also hope that you take from this, it's not the only way either. There are some really cool other ways to be able to get into cyber and to be able to call yourself a cybersecurity professional.
All right, great, thank you. Another question we have is, I'm looking at an internal role at my company, and one of the qualifications is an inherent sense of, okay, and they mentioned that they copied and pasted the bullet point, but it said QG, I don't know, asterisk, £, A, I don't even know what that means, FK something. I could post that in the chat, but yeah, that's their question.
So, a very interesting point there, and in particular, one thing I took away from it was the internal transfer. So the internal transfer, I was just having this conversation with one of my former coworkers, and my former coworker felt a little intimidated to apply to this internal position because they didn't fit the qualifications. Well, funny story. So I ended up talking to this individual and said, you should apply anyway. The folks understand what you bring to the table at the company that you're at. And many of times they want you to grow, but they might not know that you want to grow if you don't apply for the role, or at least put your hand up for the role. So I would recommend put your hand up for the role. Make sure that your management knows that you're interested in really growing your career, at the organization that you're at. And I'll tell you, when I hear about that, I love it. I want everyone on the team to grow. I want them to be part of a journey with the organization. And don't be afraid of being able to apply for those roles, because especially within your internal organization, what's great is that they already know you. When I start going through many interviews, it's the first time I've met that individual many times. So I'm trying to figure out a lot of different things as I'm interviewing this person. Well, if I'm interviewing somebody that I've worked with, I already know everything, almost everything that I need to know about the individual. It's almost just like a friendly chat at that point. And many of times, and this is totally anecdotal, I've noticed that with an internal hire, sometimes they don't fit the description, that quote unquote job description, and they end up being absolutely amazing at the role. And that's because they've already had some great conversations with their own management. They've had great conversations as part of their buildup of their career. And don't discount that internal transfer option. It's a very, very good transfer. It's a very, very good option for you to explore, to really explore your career in a bit of a safe setting, a setting that allows you to grow, not make that total leap. You're changing roles, for example, but you're not changing the entire company either. So hopefully that answers your question there. And I hope that you have that confidence to go into that role and say, hey, I'm really interested in it. Even if I don't fit A, B, and C job description here, I am really interested in it. And on the flip side of it as well, maybe you get some great advice as what you can do in order to build yourself up according to that hiring manager to be able to apply for that role in the future. And that happens a lot as well, where maybe you don't fit today in the middle of July, but maybe July of 2022, you really are a good fit again for that either same role or potentially a different role as well. But yeah, raise your hand, speak up. It's one of the best ways for you to start really exploring yourself within the organization that you're a part of already.
All right, great. Thank you for that answer. That was very helpful. Next question is, I'm considering transitioning from a web design to CTI. I previously worked in IT, and should I aim to be a SOC analyst before moving into CTI, or what should my path be?
That is a great question. One of the first things that I took in, I wouldn't worry as much about the path per se, but one thing that you had talked a little bit about in the very beginning is I believe that this individual was a web designer. Well, if you're a web designer, we have a lot of web security requirements within cybersecurity. And in fact, when we started talking about that application security, we start looking at web application security. It is a whole niche field within a niche field. I would highly recommend looking at what that web app security, web security type roles offer. You might find that a lot of that great knowledge that you have, a lot of that most likely programming knowledge, HTML type knowledge that you have really fits in quite well with some of those little more niche oriented type of app security, web app type security type conversation. So don't worry as much about the path. You have a lot of good experience, maybe without even realizing it, with that web application design that you have.
All right, great, thank you. Next question is, apart from the other roles that you have mentioned, could you please give some insights about niche roles like threat hunting and threat intelligence?
Yeah, that's a good question. And there's a reason why I didn't totally touch on that, and that part of which is a lot of those more niche type roles I've noticed, and I also do the same thing, tend to require a little bit more experience in the field. So I believe that threat intelligence was brought up, and I forget the other one now, but threat intelligence was brought up. I've noticed that in a lot of circumstances, a threat intelligence analyst, a threat intelligence role, we're looking for a little bit of that experience within cybersecurity. Now, I take that in a few different ways, right? Because you can have that technical CTI type of experience, but then there's also strategic type of cyber threat intelligence, where almost you have to learn about things from a political science point of view, and you have to do a lot of writing with that as well. That absolutely is another way of being able to knock at the door a little bit, utilizing CTI as that mechanism. So you have to look at it from, do you want to go that a little bit less strategic, or I'm sorry, less technical route, or do you want to go that technical route? To go strategic, you might find that doing a little bit of research, being able to write really well, being able to brief board members or senior management about the threats and the threat landscape is another really good way. So I'm really glad that that individual brought that up, and absolutely is yet another way to be able to make your entrance within the cybersecurity field.
Great, thank you. Next question is, would a PMP in combination with the SANS New to Cyber program be a good route for someone who may need more project management experience, as well as the technical cyber skill set?
So I'll answer that in the way that I've worked with most project managers, is the project managers that I've worked with and those who have taken that Management 512 course that I teach end up really enjoying cybersecurity, and they get very involved with a lot of the projects that we have. Enough so that they're able to really govern a lot of the tool sets, a lot of the programs within cybersecurity through all of the different projects that they have moved forward with. So I would think about it as, if you are aligned to a project, in a cybersecurity project in particular, that is a great opportunity for you to learn about how does this tool set really fit into that cybersecurity umbrella? How does it fit into the stronger cybersecurity or the security portfolio as part of that larger group of projects? And then especially as that project lead or that project manager, what can you do to not only facilitate what needs to be done, but potentially, well, being able to really get down into the details of what needs to be implemented. How do you showcase how things are implemented? How do we showcase that the project is successful? Everything that you do as that project manager, well, you really can get into the weeds very quickly within projects. And that sort of forces you to have some very technical, at least conversations with the implementators. Almost all project managers I have worked with who are aligned to cybersecurity really became quite technical very quickly as they really wanted to learn a lot more about cybersecurity through the project that they were associated with. So it's yet again another really good opportunity. We talked a little bit about business analysts, and I referenced a little bit about project management as well. Project management is a great way to get some of that experience along the way.
All right, great, thank you. Next question is, currently a cybersecurity student. I've had trouble translating my 12 years of municipal law enforcement to cybersecurity specialist / analyst or threat hunter role resume. Any insight?
One recommendation I would have is to potentially look at incident response. It could be incident response through private organization or potentially through the government, but that experience that you have really does lend very well to incident response. Not that it's the only way for you to get into the cybersecurity field, but I think it's a very, very good way of being able to get in. In fact, when I took the forensics course, the instructor who was teaching the forensics course was also a law enforcement agent as well. And I noticed that a lot of those who are in digital forensics incident response, especially maybe even with larger organizations or with the government, do have some of that law enforcement experience in the background to be able to really build upon, well, their law enforcement experience and add a little bit of a technical spin along the way. So yeah, incident response absolutely would be a great way to explore a potential entryway into the cybersecurity field with that background.
Thank you. Next question is, does government keep up with the ever-changing technologies and methods and standards used in private cyber sector, or does the private side really lead the standards development?
So when we talk about standards and some of the controls, many of times we're utilizing government sanctioned, or not, I don't want to say sanctioned, but government developed controls. NIST has a framework that we utilize in many other, not only private organizations, but also public as well. We also have, for example, the cybersecurity framework that came down from the United States government. So there is a lot of good interaction between the government and also the private sector as well. Now, speaking solely from the private sector, we do utilize many of the government frameworks in order to do assessments against our program. So we do utilize those government programs or the government, whether it be the frameworks or the controls that showcase exactly what we're doing within our program and what our gap analysis is, what it's going to ultimately turn into when we do a corrective action plan against what might not be fitting a requirement set by, for example, NIST or ISO, for example, which are government organizations.
All right, great, thank you. We still have a couple more questions. I wasn't sure if you wanted to follow up later on, or did you have a couple more minutes?
Yeah, I think it would be great to do a follow-up, or also as well, I'll be doing a blog post on this. So as I start doing that blog post, I'll be able to answer some of the questions that you might have. And it's really great that you have the questions, continue to ask the questions. And then Jessica as well, I believe there also potentially is a feedback form. In that feedback form, I might be able to also ask some of those questions as well. And I'll really try hard to be able to answer some of those within the blog post that I have as well. But hey, I have time for one more if you're interested, Jessica.
Okay. Let me see. All right, I think this one pertains to your slide, so I'll ask this one. They mentioned the assessment you mentioned say that they are sold in packs of 25. How does an individual use them?
Sorry, Jessica, I didn't get that one. You mind repeating that?
The question just asked, the assessments you mentioned, they are sold in packs of 25. How does an individual use them?
Oh, okay. That's a great question. So the assessments that I was talking about, yeah, so I'm not, I referenced it a little bit more so we could look at what the functional areas of cyber are. There's a lot of different ways that we could divide up what the functional areas of cybersecurity are. In terms of the assessments and actually taking the assessment, a lot of times it's through the organization that you might be interviewing with along the way. And I referenced this in a prior webinar as well. But if you do want some more information about that, I would highly recommend contacting SANS directly to understand potentially what you might be able to do with some of those assessments from the vantage point of being able to, again, potentially maybe even take one of those tests. But that absolutely is a great question for SANS directly on being able to take those.
All right, great, thank you. So that's all the time that we do have for today. If you do have any questions that have not been answered from today's webcast, you can reach out to the presenter or send them over to q@sans.org, and we'll be sure to give that over to Kevin. So thank you to our speaker, Kevin, for that great presentation, which helps brings this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, please visit sans.org/webcast. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.